The information provided is not a substitute for legal and other professional advice where the facts and circumstances warrant. People should always consult their own legal or other professional advisors and discuss the facts and circumstances that apply to their specific circumstances. The information shared on Ask the Landlord is for educational purposes only.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Ask the Landlord with your favorite landlord, Albert Dweck. I'm Melissa. I'm one of Albert's producers and a former New York City renter. And together, we're going to be asking this landlord some questions. All right, Albert, here's my question today. I have a friend and they're moving to New York City. They don't know anyone and they really can't afford the prices. How do they find a roommate?
Melissa, that's probably one of the biggest questions that people ask when they come to New York. I think you think about, in earlier episodes, we talked about affordability of New York, and it's so expensive. And when we think about affordability with a lowercase a, like not affordable apartments, that are made for certain income um, s- groups, is you have affordable. Question is, what does affordable mean? Usually, we say that 30% of your gross annual income is what you should be spending on rent. Another way to look at that is 40 times the monthly rent, right, is what you have to be earning as gross annual. And that's really what landlords test for. Like if you want to know if you qualify for a rent, you have to be making 40 times the monthly rent. Okay. So then you say, okay, so fine. So let's say I'm making $50,000 a year, which is not bad. It happens to be the average salary in New York, right? So then you're saying, oh, $50,000 a year. And you're like, okay, ideally I want to live I'm one person, I'm single, and I want to live in a studio or a one bedroom near work, right? Who doesn't? By myself. See, so of course you type in one of these search engines, whatever, and you find an apartment and you're like, oh, so a one bedroom apartment is $4,000. You're like, 40 times 4 is 160 and thousand, and I'm making 50. I can't afford that. What am I doing? Well, I'll get a roommate and we'll split the one bedroom. You say, well, that's 2,000. That means you have to make 80 and you're only making 50. What do I do? Well, okay. You say, well, I'll live in a different area and maybe I'll get more space and I'll have more roommates. And I'm like, okay, but I don't know anybody. I just moved to New York City. How do I handle that? Well, till today, everyone should know like 40% of New Yorkers, I mean, I read this recently, right? Or 40% of New Yorkers are living together to afford the rent because the rent is so expensive. So it's pretty common that people share the rent to afford it. And obviously, if you're starting out and you can't pay these crazy prices, you're like, oh, I want to find roommates that I could share, like say, 3 bedroom with, right? So then, how do you go about that, right? I mean, people go on Facebook and they go on Craigslist and they find, I don't know how do they find people quickly and that they trust. And we spoke about having roommates and you're joining several on the lease. You're making financial commitments with these people. You don't know who they are, right? Okay. So the good news is that there's a solution today for that, and it's called co-living. So there are companies out there that say, listen, I realize that people are living together to afford the rent, right? And when those people live together, they have to figure out whose furniture it is, who takes care of, who cleans, who buys the household stuff, how do we split the bill? What if one person's going to be here longer? What if one person's going to be here shorter? So there are companies that said, you know what? Why don't you'll come together? We'll put you together with like-minded people and you pay one price and we'll furnish the place and you don't have to worry about all the other stuff. We'll remove all the friction from you and we'll find you roommates and give you more flexibility. And that is essentially co-living. And there's a bunch of companies now across the United States and especially in the big cities where people want to live in these metropolitan areas where there's not a lot of space and not very affordable apartments. where they're helping people they're providing people with affordable options for sharing. And the really good companies are making great options where they're realizing that people are living together to afford the rent, and they're saying, look, we're going to give you, we know you're living here at sharing, so we're going to lean into that and give you great services, so you pay one price that's, let's say, cheaper than you would be on your own, and more affordable even than a studio apartment or a one bedroom or something like that, and it gives you more flexibility. So that's what co-living does. Now you might probably have a lot of questions, because I know you haven't heard about this, Melissa, before, and this sort of happened in the last few years in the country since since you've left. But tell us.
So does the co-living company put their name down for like your Con Ed bill? Or that goes to the person?
Yes, yes. Very often in these
Wow.
situations, the landlord or the management company that's managing is the person that's responsible for the utilities, and they charge you. Now, from the landlord's perspective, they're charging more money because everything's included,
Hmm.
right? But yes, that's the idea.
Who's charging more? The landlord for the lease,
The
for the
landlord,
rent?
the tenant is going to pay more money than they would sharing with somebody, but more
Hmm.
things will be included.
Hmm. So these are companies called co-live, and they promote co-living, and they make your life easier if you're moving to a big city, you don't know anyone. I did not know this existed.
They organize events.
Wow. And do they do
Yeah,
it based
yeah,
on your interests? Like, let's say I
they
love
do.
cooking.
They do. And there's like
Wow.
they have a lot of these now with the advent of technology. And the funny thing is, like, you're saying this, I know, like, we're on a podcast, but the real estate industry is like very slow to technology, and you think like, oh, this totally makes sense. Like, we just talked about in prior episodes, oh, you don't know your neighbors, but if you were all on like an app together and you could, really get in touch, you have your own group that you could very much talk to all the time without actually, meeting. And then you could arrange, oh, I like yoga, I'm doing a class, I have this interest, I have cooking, why don't I host you, this and that. So people can do that naturally. And then also the those can be curated, events can be curated, which is really cool.
Wow. I am looking this up and this exists. I believed you,
It
but
does.
I had to see it with my own eyes. Wow. So very cool. Very interesting. It's
Yeah.
its own interface, it's its own
Yeah.
website, and that's how you can go.
Yeah.
Really
And
great
now look,
information.
yeah, it's really good. And then you think about also, it's like, what about, well, there's a rules in New York City, like Airbnb, you can't rent for less than a month. But at the same time, co-living also affords you some flexibility where, as long as you're there for longer than a month, um, you can have shorter term periods. It doesn't have to be that you're there the whole time. Like, what if you have a semester that you're in New York as a graduate student or something, or you have a work assignment for 5 months or 6 months, and you wanted to do that kind of arrangement? That's easier also, because you're not tied to these roommates necessarily.
Right. And using a service like co-living could make you not live in a horror film that would
Sure,
happen.
sure, sure.
Could avoid that
You know,
situation, you know?
yeah. And then look, not, these things happen, as we know, and people don't always get along and things. So, sometimes, and there's, if you're in their network, you could sort of get to another apartment if for some reason you don't like this one. They could relocate you or things like that. So
So does the co-living company, or does any of these companies, do they take the place of the guarantor?
no, no.
So
The
that still
As we
exists.
said, you're a renter,
Hmm.
and you still have to demonstrate that. That's another question. I'll get back to it in a minute, but no. So the answer is, you still have to demonstrate that you could pay. That you're earning 40 times the monthly rent. You have good credit, etc. That's that. That's important. Now, that's a good question, and maybe for another episode. But there are also services that can help with guarantors.
Wow. And
If
what
you
is a
can't-
guarantor?
A guarantor is someone that can help you have the financial backing to be able to afford the rent. For example, you have to have a lot of times over a certain credit score, or you have to be earning a certain amount of money. What if you're just starting out and you just moved or whatever, and you don't have all those things? You have a co-signer or something that makes enough money that can do that for you. That's a guarantor.
Okay. We'll talk about it in another episode.
In another episode, sure.
For sure.
So that's a little bit about co-living.
So these are options. You can go the old school route of Facebook or Craigslist, or just asking your parents or anyone you know from life's past. Or now there are new services that I did not know about till 10 minutes ago called co-living, and other services that you can go and search for roommates who are credible.
That's right.
Which is
That's
important.
Right. You could search. You could actually just take care of yourself, and then they'll put together you together with roommates. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Very
Albert.
cool. Thank you. You're welcome.
For more episodes, please subscribe to Ask the Landlord on your favorite podcast platform. We'd appreciate it if you left a review on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to watch the show, check out our Ask the Landlord YouTube channel. If you have a question for Albert, feel free to contact him on Instagram at Ask the Landlord, and check out his TikTok at Ask the Landlord. Bridging the gap between landlords and tenants, this has been Ask the Landlord. Thanks for listening.